Hi friends, and welcome back. Today we are doing video number 4, I believe. Yes, video number 4 for Ali Abdaal's 7 video challenge. This prompt is to review a product. I have chosen to review an author. It's somebody that I've gotten into very recently. Funnily enough, my therapist actually is the one who recommended him to me. She's a big fan and has followed him through his career. And I was talking about a different book. I think I had finished a fantasy book and was saying how much I enjoyed it and wished that I had something that was just as good to follow it up. And she recommended Brandon Sanderson. Now, I know I am late to this party. He's a prolific writer, has been writing and publishing fantasy series for a while now. If you've been in a bookstore recently, I'm sure you've seen his latest release. It is prominent in every store I've been to. But I am new to him, as I said, and so I've only read a few of his books. Based on recommendations, I did start with the Mistborn series. So the Mistborn series is a trilogy. It's definitely an epic fantasy, classic, like basically good versus evil. In that series, after he finished the trilogy, I think a while later he came back and added some more books to that specific world that he built, and they were a completely different vibe. So I started with Mistborn, and then I started to read the follow-up series for that, and it wasn't quite what I was looking for at the time. So I put a bunch of his other books on hold at the library, and I just finished Tress of the Emerald Sea. Now, what inspired me to review him for this video is that the basically like 3 things I've read. So the Mistborn trilogy, obviously that's 3 full books on its own, but it was a trilogy. And then the follow-up series in that same world, and then Tress of the Emerald Sea. They're all so different. They are, definitely in the fantasy genre. As I mentioned, the Mistborn trilogy is an epic fantasy. And so it's a big quest, it's saving the world, it's a ragtag team, learning about each of the characters and how they contribute to the mission as a whole. Excellent books. What I enjoyed so much about it is, I think I mentioned this in my last video about books. I'm not a huge fan of the classic epic fantasies because I feel like it's like just plot and like maybe like the political machinations or the like advancement of battle/war is really like the driving force, whereas I prefer more character development. So I feel like Brandon Sanderson hit a sweet spot with the Mistborn trilogy. It's definitely about revolution and overthrowing the government and good versus evil, but the characters in it, there's a lot of character growth, and there's recognition of that character growth and like reflecting on how people have changed and how they are existing or like reacting to situations in a way that they wouldn't have at the beginning of the series. Like that is in the book. And so it feels like the plot of the whole epic fantasy is very strong. So it's obviously very plot driven, but he puts in enough character development that I was really like hooked. Additionally, it had super fascinating to me, a very different magic system So in this world, magic is based off of metal, and so burning different metals gives you different abilities. So you have a base metal and it's alloy, and they are basically like opposite powers. So one of burning one metal allows you to push away other metals from you, and the alloy of that allows you to pull metals towards you. So it's very like physics related, and the main character learning how to use her magic, it's obvious that like he nerded out on the physics of this and made it, I felt, pretty darn realistic. So I thought that whole concept was very cool. I don't feel like I've seen a magic system like that before. I've not read it. So I really appreciate that, and it was very well thought out. I didn't find any holes in the magic system or like just things like written away. So that was really cool. And then in addition to general character development, what I really appreciated is that the questions that this book was asking are epic questions. So we've got what/who is God? What is religion and belief? And basically like, who am I? And what of myself do I want to keep, and what of myself do I want to change? I feel like those were the main questions asked, which are questions that I asked myself. But I feel like he did it in a way that it didn't feel like he set out to ask those questions and like built a story that serviced that. It felt like that was genuinely just like part of the story, and it feels like it not tricks you into asking those questions, but like you're along for the ride, and the ride leads you to those questions. But I really, really enjoyed that series. I got very much sucked in. The books are longer for sure, and what I was just very impressed with is I feel like you can, a lot of fantasies you read, and it's clear that like the first book was a complete idea and then we've added on to it, whereas this very much felt like the first book, like things that were laid down in the first book that didn't necessarily affect the plot of the first book were coming up in the third book. Like the, twists at the end were foreshadowed in the first book. So clearly he had thought the whole story through, which I feel like it seems pretty difficult to do well, and he did it very well. So we've got that Mistborn trilogy, epic fantasy, followed up with the books that are set in that same world, just like, I think it's like a couple centuries later, I don't remember how much time, but like generations later. So the epic fantasy was set in times, like you could say, like medievally. Like there are castles and like defensive walls, people ride horses, definitely like that time frame of humanity's evolution. And then in the second set, we've advanced to basically like the Wild West time. So there are guns at this point, and carriages, and the very beginning of cars. So what I found so interesting, I definitely went into that expecting it to be the same as the original trilogy, because it's a continuation of the series, but it's really not. So I definitely want to warn you that if you read Brandon Sanderson and make the same mistake I did, don't. It's a completely different, it's the same world, so it's like connected, but it's a different series. So that series is much more of a kind of honestly a detective. It's a detective series. And so in that one, the main person, honestly, I've only read 1.5 because like I said, it wasn't quite what I was looking for, but it's definitely more like, it's got more humor to it, and it's a detective story instead of an epic fantasy, which I was shocked by, but also pretty impressed that an author can switch modes like that. Which takes us to what I just read, which was Tress of the Emerald Sea. That is the first book in a completely different series of Brandon Sanderson's, and this, instead of an epic fantasy or a detective fantasy, is instead a fairy tale fantasy. It is based on, so at the end of the audiobook, there was an afterword read by Brandon, and he kind of talks about where he got the idea for it, and he mentioned that the kind of fantastical twist in that world that he built is that the sea is not wet, it's not made of water, it's instead made of spores, and so they are like granules of sand. And he talks about the liquefaction of sand. Apparently, I've not heard of this, but if you have like air coming up underneath sand, it can turn it liquid-like. So he had this idea of a world where their seas aren't water, but instead are these liquefied substances. But he just didn't know basically like how to use that yet. So that was kind of brewing in his mind. And then the narrator of this story, unfortunately, I'm not sure if I think they're from a different series, but he wanted to use them as a narrator. And so he had those two ideas. And then he had, during COVID, apparently he made his family watch The Princess Bride because they had not seen it. It is one of my favorite movies, so that put a little extra special love in for the book for me. But if you haven't seen The Princess Bride, you should definitely go watch it. It's a cult classic. But after watching it, his wife was like, Princess Buttercup didn't really do anything. Like, being one of the main characters in the movie, she didn't really do anything, which was a little disappointing. And apparently she asked him, like, what do you think the story would be if, instead of just assuming that her love, Wesley, was dead when she learned of the pirate attack, what if she, like, went after him to confirm that? And so that's what inspired this story. So the story is, our main character, Tress, is on this island that's very isolated. They're not, like, the inhabitants aren't allowed to leave. And so she's a window washer, and she falls in love with, like, the Duke, I think, son. And the Duke doesn't like that, so he sends his son off to find a wife of nobility. And they hatch a plot that the Duke's son will sabotage each of his meetings to make sure that he doesn't get married so that he can come back and marry her. But the dad catches on to that and sends him to sail the seas to, like, try and talk to a sorceress who has been ruining lives for a long time, and nobody's ever been able to talk to her. So it was instead of a suicide mission, a homicide mission. He wanted his son to just go away because he wasn't doing what he wanted. And so she hears that he's been, instead of being killed, he was captured by the sorceress, and they sent a ransom note, but the Duke doesn't want to do anything about it. So she goes off to find and save him herself. Lots of adventure ensues. She ends up on a ship as part of a pirate crew, and, you know, initially thinks they're her enemies, but then, you know, finds friends and family in the crew. What I love so much about this book was the tone of it. It was very whimsical. The narrator is in fact also in the story, but he's not the main character. But his character in the story is cursed, so he's like a bumbling idiot. He's lost all of his senses, his common sense, his sense of humor, his sense of taste. So he's a ding-dong. But the narrator is like commenting on the fact that like it's embarrassing to tell a story about himself being this way and that sort of thing. So that's a fun twist on the storytelling. And then along with that, the narrator would go on tangents that were really like life lessons. And so like one of them was about Tress had the opportunity to just assume she knew what was going on, and instead she like stopped and was like, before I go down this like train of thought and make decisions based off of incomplete information, let me make sure I have all the information and know what's happening. And so then like the narrator kind of pauses the story and goes on a tangent about like how many wars could have been stopped and how many heartaches could have been avoided if you just got all the information before acting on things. And then also, like it was just very witty. It was very witty and enjoyable, and I loved little tangents. And reading it, actually halfway through, I told Rachel that it felt like Brandon's Just for Fun project. It felt very much like, you know, this is a fun little thing to do. I've got lots to say, and so I'm gonna write this just for fun. In the afterward, it turns out he was doing exactly that. When his wife asked that question about the Princess Bride, what would happen if she went after him, and it triggered this story, and he was able to pull in these ideas that had been brewing for a while. He said that he was writing it in secret and actually had like a secret folder in his cloud so that his team couldn't find the document, and so he was just writing it for his and his wife's enjoyment. But then obviously ended up sharing it, and now there's actually 6 books in the series, so I'm very excited to keep reading that. But I just think it is so impressive that Brandon can have such different types of books, like the plotting, the development, the writing style. It's all different, because an epic fantasy versus detective fantasy versus a fairy tale fantasy, those are very different things, and he did all of them well, and I just think that's so impressive. And he's got more series, which I'm very excited to read. I just got Elantris, so I'm starting that one, and I'm excited to see where that goes. That's his first book published, so I think it'll be interesting to see the changes in his writing as he has matured. But I definitely would say if you want to explore fantasy, Brandon Sanderson seems like he has every type to offer, and he is a very good writer. I've not found really any plot holes, and the character development is there. The magic elements are fascinating and really well thought out and really interesting. So 10 out of 10 in my opinion. 10 out of 10. Good job, Brandon Sanderson. If you are at all interested in fantasy, you should definitely check out his books. His website has good kind of breakdown of the different types of books he has, and based on your interests, that can indicate where to start. Thanks for listening to me yap a little more today. I hope y'all are having a wonderful day. I hope you like and subscribe, and I will see you in video number 5. Have a good one.